So, hi, my name's Kevin from Avid AI. I've been chuckling to myself as I've been listening to some of the talks of hearing people come from Los Angeles, New York, talk to somebody from Chicago. I live literally 5 minutes that way. I go to conferences once or twice a month. Never have I had the ability to literally go home and go to bed, and I can get there in 5 minutes. It's fantastic. So thank you guys for having me, because this makes my kids happier. I get to see my daughter's choir concert tonight. Yeah, super excited about that. So, just out of curiosity, I'm going to do a quick show of hands. How many people are involved with the marketing at their organization? Okay. How many people are involved with the fundraising at their organization? Okay. We're going to walk a fine line here of talking about both. And it's always interesting whenever people ask, like, how did you get into fundraising? No one goes to college, no one goes to seminary and says, I want to ask people for money for a living. But it's a calling. It's a special calling. So a quick aside about my company. I'm from a group and software called Avid AI. What we do is we sit on top of nonprofit software on the CRM, email platform, social media, email capture, donation form, to produce aggregations of data, visualizations, identify segments, help deploy campaigns. I'll get a little bit into this, but I want to define it, and really more than that, I want to define what I mean by AI. I learned early on that this is probably a good idea, and actually 3 weeks back, the reason I've started doing this more and more is I was having a conversation with my sister-in-law, and my 5-year-old nephew was running around. She was asking me about how the new company is going, how things are going, and said it's great, and she just happened to mention the company name of Avid AI. And Charlie, my nephew, looked at me, he goes, you work on AI? I was thinking pretty good about myself. I'm like, yeah, I work on AI. He goes, you work on robots? And just the fear in his eyes when he said this, I was like, no, I don't work on robots. And he just sighed of relief. Come to find out, his 10-year-old brother had watched a show he shouldn't have watched on television and had described to his 5-year-old little brother what AI is. And in his mind, he thought I was building Skynet and everything that came with that. So I've learned we're going to define what I mean by AI for the sake of my nephew, if no other reason. But so in my language here, what I'm trying to define, there's really 4 types of AI as it relates to fundraising and to marketing. There's machine learning with segmentation. Now, when you get into the actual theory and how things work, there's a lot of crossover. I know that. But I'm going to try to keep these into these big buckets. Machine learning of segmentation, we'll get into some definitions, the large language models, the GPTs, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. AI agents, we heard a great amount about them earlier this morning and how those can be used to automate a lot of the individual tasks. And then there's the very scary robots that are coming, according to my nephew. We should be worried about that. But I want to focus my time on talking not about the AI agents. I can't do as well as those that have already talked about it. And realistically, they're new enough in the nonprofit and marketing space that they haven't gotten in touching a lot of fundraising yet. There's going to be a lot of agency, a lot of use in the future, but I want to focus also, I'll probably ignore the scary robots for obvious reasons. I want to focus in on machine learning and then the large language models. And what I'm going to be digging into on this is I want to start with a little bit of history to give the context for how these things work. Guys, we have plenty of seats up front if anybody wants to come sit down. I don't spit, I promise. It's great. I'm going to provide a little historical context for how these things have worked within the nonprofit industry. This might be old news to a lot of you, but bear with me. I want to get into a little bit of how these can be used, and then I want to give some practical examples, whether it's software, whether it's ways to apply other software, that I think will be helpful, and hopefully something you guys can take back to your own ministries. That's my goal. So let's start off with the machine learning side of things. So I'm going to give a quick history and a little bit of just a definition for those that don't know it. The machine learning, identifying patterns, relationships, and rules from data to perform tasks like classification, personalization, prediction, optimization. In the nonprofit world, in the ministry world, what I would say is this takes 3 key forms with today's software. There's a lot it can do and will do. I'm talking about today. Segmentation, projections, and personalization. Meaning, how can I better identify and segment my individuals within my organization, whether it's a donor, non-donor, and then all the stratifications that appear within. the projections, how much am I going to raise at the end of this year based on who I have and what I'm spending today. It's possible. And then the personalization, which is an area that very few are tapping into, but I feel that's going to be the next big wave, especially with ministries, especially as we get into it. So with this focus on the nonprofit side, I want to give you a very brief history. And if I'm wrong, ChatGPT has guided me in a lot of wrong ways, so that's really its fault, not mine. But when we get into nonprofit segmentation specifically, what we're doing today is not new. It's not unique. Started back in the 60s in the for-profit industry with the application of RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary divisions of, in that case, buyers. The people that were doing this were the ad agencies that were sending out catalogs, credit card applications, and they wanted to maximize their ROI. So they looked at who's buying, what they're buying, who's buying how much, and they applied that methodology. It wasn't until about the 80s that nonprofits got into it. And it was later 80s on this one. And when I say nonprofits, this is not the small nonprofit. This is not a ministry with 1,000 donors. This is the Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity. These are the big ones that were sending out tens of millions of letters. And so they needed a way to better segment. And realistically, they weren't the ones doing it. It was the agencies serving them. And it wasn't done by computers like we do today. It was largely just stratification, assign a number from 1 to 20, and figure out who to send based on that. Because what they realized early on is that the person most likely to give you a gift is the last person that just gave you the gift. Whoever gives to you the most, whoever gives the most often at the highest volume is the one most likely to give you your next one. I'm going to talk more about this in a second, but this actually can lead to some problems, depending on how you segment. Yeah? Are we going to get a copy of your presentation? Sure. Absolutely. They will be sending out copies of these, but I feel really good about myself when people take pictures of the slides. So if you just want to pretend to take pictures, that's great too. It makes me feel real big up here. Real important. So the other thing worth noting is when they get into the RFM side of things, especially back in the 80s and 90s, the channel was direct mail. It was sending out the letters, the 4-page, the 10-page letters with appeals, an envelope, send back money, get money back. That makes sense. And then the 2000s hit, and actually we got some software that could do it for us. CRM started implementing it. Keep in mind this was Blackbaud in the early days. Salesforce wasn't even in it yet. Donor Direct. They weren't doing it well, but they were doing it. But what it allowed is nonprofits to be able to have that same capabilities to pull data based on that RFM methodology. And so because software was doing it for them, there was a little bit of advancements that agencies, data modeling companies started doing of applying linear regression, just a little layer on top. But if you go back and look at what the outcome was, it was 90% RFM. Again, the person who gave to you most recently is most likely to give to you again. And so that's who they talk to. Now we get closer to today. Oop, I jumped ahead a couple times there. We got into 2010s, that's when predictive modeling became a thing. And when we talk about predictive modeling, especially in the nonprofit, they were dealing with tens of factors, meaning we brought in wealth, we brought in purchase behavior, co-ops became a thing, meaning if we all share our data, we are more than likely to get better insights. Because here's a fun fact that most ministries, a lot of nonprofits don't like to know, but if you share your donors, the more a donor gives to your ministry and another ministry, they don't give less to both, they give more to both. Generosity begets generosity. We know that in the Bible alone. And so co-ops offered a way for people and ministries to combine their data to get better insights, to get better targeting, and then get better results, not at their own detriment. And so they produced some new models, though, that allowed us to do a little bit better segmentation. What's the likelihood of someone to give? What's the likelihood of someone to lapse and to upgrade? We started getting better, but again, we're dealing with tens of factors. Compared to when we look at what happens today, nonprofits and the models that get created by the software and the services that are out there use hundreds of factors. What emails do they open? What website pages do they go to? What forms do they submit? What things do they buy? Facebook has one of the best algorithms out there that is amazing at this, and the way that we find donors for our nonprofits is by finding people willing to buy online, because the transaction works together, it's hand in hand. So the more factors we give it, the better our models became. And so the other big factor that came along with this is that the models kept getting bigger and bigger because we got more and more data. Every email that got sent out gave me more data to use. Now, I'll say all of this to say this is actually a potential problem right now. We are getting the best ROI that we've ever gotten with these machine learning algorithms. You put $1 into Facebook, you'll get 80 cents back, which is normal acquisition type returns. You get into where direct mail was 10 years ago, you were lucky to get 50 cents back. So it's improving our ROI, but at a detriment. So part of Avid includes benchmarking. I used to rail against benchmarking. I felt it was pooled ignorance, but the challenge I had with it was the data is A, self-reported, believe it if you want, but then B, it was out of date the moment it's published. The 2024 year-end report will come out at the end of this month and then another one out in July, which means by the time you're telling me what happened in 2024, I don't care anymore because I'm worried about what's happening now. Plus, that was election. This is not election. The world's changed. Things are happening. But what we ended up doing is building a live, constant feedback and a constant benchmark that is up to date as of yesterday, what's happening in the industry. We work with a lot of large ministries, and what we're seeing is if you look in the last trailing 12 months by year, over the last 5 years, what is the percent growth in revenue? Meaning a positive number means the ministries got bigger, a smaller number means they shrunk in their revenue. Revenue's in general getting bigger. We're making more money than we've ever made at a nonprofit industry. Doesn't matter what benchmark you look at. You can look at Giving USA, you can look at M&R. This is a pretty common trend for those analyzing the industry. A similar trend, though, is the flip side of that, which is donors. You see the COVID bump in 2021. And then ever since COVID, there's been a steady decline. There's a slight bump last year, but for the most part, it stayed the same. Meaning fewer donors are now carrying the lion's share of the weight of revenue. I'm not saying it's necessarily one-on-one in terms of machine learning and algorithms, but it's something worth noting. And I say that because I don't often get to speak with ministry-minded individuals, but it's worth noting. I think philanthropy, giving, is its own theology, it's its own ministry. Corinthians talks about each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. But if we aren't able to ask people, if we're afraid to ask because they didn't get enough score, I wonder if we're perpetuating this problem. I say that because we're going to talk about ways to apply models, and you should apply models because it does help with ROI. You need more money, we do more ministry. But can we apply it smartly? And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. Because there's some considerations when we get into modeling. To decide, should I create a model? Should I find out who's most likely to give? Who's most likely to upgrade? You should probably ask 2 quick questions. When I talk about the ROI of modeling, modeling costs money. More than that, modeling costs time. And in my opinion, time is a harder resource for most ministries than the money aspect is. We only have so much time in the world, so what are we going to spend it doing? And so in order to get the good ROI of your modeling, you have to try to do 2 things. 1, reduce cost. Send to people who aren't going to give me a gift. No, don't send something to somebody who's not going to give me a gift anyway. 2, improve personalization. This is an area we can do so much better than. Meaning, I know not only whether they're likely to give, that's easy enough. What aspects of my ministry do they like? Are they motivated by pro-life causes or are they motivated by evangelism? That can tell me how to talk. It's not going to change my core message as a ministry. Our value prop stays the same, but just the way you talk about it can shift just slightly. This is also where AI can also play in and allowing us to scale that messaging. The other thing to consider, the quality and quantity of your data is going to determine how good that model is. These are very rough numbers. There's not a single number of you have to have this many donors, this many conversions, but let me just play out some math for you. If I want to do a person who's likely to become a sustaining donor, a recurring donor to give me monthly, I need between 50 to 100 transactions. The average nonprofit has maybe 5% of their donor base giving a monthly gift. That means I need around 5,000 donors before I can even get a reasonable model, and those have to be recent donors. It's important to know, do I have enough of an audience to even utilize this technology to spend the time to do it? The technology is getting better. You'll be able to reduce model sizes over time, but if we're limited on resources, we have to pick and choose our battles. And the data you put in to your CRM, the way we capture our information is just as important as actually the information behind it, meaning You captured a donation. Do you know what channel they gave it in? Was it online? Was it a direct mail letter? Was it a check that they handed to you? That's important to know. Do we know sub-channels? Did it come from email versus social media? Those are two very different motivations. The more effort we can put into making sure our data is right, the better we're going to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when this information, this ability is super cheap and super scalable. So spending good time on good data hygiene, one of the least fun topics to talk about, is important. But then also, when it comes down to it, if you're spending time, if you're spending money, it's important to measure the results. That doesn't say I made more money this year than last year, because you look at this year's world is very different than last year's world. I can tell you, you look at what the economy is going to look like in a few years, it's going to be even more different than that. But we can A/B test. We can run a model and not ignore it for 10% of our audience and see how they did. That's going to be critical to success and understanding what's the true ROI of doing these kind of activities. So what are some segments worth modeling? I have alluded to some of these. Who's likely to respond? And I'm going to point out something here. Who's likely to respond to direct mail, to texting, to calling? The reason I noted those 3 channels is because they all share one common thing between them. What's that? You can do personalization with it. They also cost money. If I added in there an email, a social media post, those are free for the most part. Segmentation for personalization-wise, great, you should, but not sending somebody because they aren't likely to respond in an email, well, somebody will, so why would I not? And so you have to be careful of factoring in the cost side of things and where it makes sense to not do segmentation as well. You get into likely to become a recurring gift, and the reason I point that one out, the way you ask for a recurring gift is different than the way you ask for a one-time. If I'm asking for a monthly commitment, you talk about a lasting impact, and you also ask for less. I'm not going to ask for a $100 gift. I would ask for a $20 gift and ask for it 12 times. So knowing they're likely to retain changes how much I ask. I'm willing to sacrifice money today for what I know will be a lot more money in the future. So with that being the case, there's a couple really cool technologies out there that are worth considering for just about any size ministry. One, it's a donation platform called Fundraising, very friendly to the ministry space. The reason I love these guys for a lot of reasons. One is there's no long-term contract. You can just try it. They make their money off of a percentage of the donation raised, which is how all of them do it, but most of them try to lock you into a long-term contract. But where they get interesting is the way they're applying these machine learning algorithms. Somebody that accesses my form from Beverly Hills on an iPhone is going to be asked for a different amount of money than somebody that accesses it on an Android in Montana. Because the wealth, the behavior that goes with that changes how much you should ask for them, because $5 there is very different than $5 over there. So they're smart about it. They have some cool technologies about cart abandonment. They notice when people are starting to likely to fall off, and so they stop trying to complete the transaction and try to just say, hey, do you want to come back later? Do you want to save this? But they're wise about it that not everyone sees that. And they have some interesting the fraud that ends up costing us as much time as it does money, of people using the forms to try to steal credit cards, which drives me insane for own reasons. Another couple worth doing is when you get into the data modeling side of things, it's interesting to talk about who's likely to become recurring, but the reality is very few ministries have the resources to devote to build those models themselves. Even if they did, we need to focus on the things we do best, and very rarely is a ministry's best thing they do modeling for propensity to give. So there's other great firms. Weiland Taro is another good one. Donor Bureau that you can join co-ops. There's a lot of ways you can utilize these data, but it helps you get multiple signals, and this is kind of what we talk about, where you can share enough data that you benefit from everybody else's. Highly recommend it. So that's the machine learning side of things. Again, a lot of crossover, but I also want to hit on the large language models, the GPTs. The use cases are bountiful. And again, before I get into it, though, I thought it'd be helpful to do a quick history of the GPT. So in the 60s, nothing was happening. Up until 2017. Basically, nothing happened until the last few years. This is how crazy this has been moving. That if I were to give a talk 3 years ago, this wouldn't have even been a slide. And now this is the way we have to start thinking. But when you start looking at the way they were using it, it does change the way things work. And I'm nowhere near as smart as some of the different talkers and speakers that we have at this conference in terms of how GPT functions, the way it works. But what they used to do was a word predictive. What word should come next based upon the current word where I'm going? We've moved to context, which is why it's so important, why you can get actually cohesive message that works across. Because now when we look today, it was around 2017 that OpenAI released the GPT. Google was the one that produced the white paper that talked about here's a different way of thinking of AI and the models that went along with it. Fun fact, ChatGPT was based on GPT-3's model. There was a GPT-1 and a GPT-2. They never released 2 because there was just an outright fear of how it would be used. So they made it better and added some guardrails. I always thought that was interesting. But today we can do text, images, video. It can even pass what's called the Turing test. For those that aren't computer science nerds like me, AI can pass as a human to somebody talking to it. It's scary, but good if used right. So, what do we get? This is what I want to hit on first. This has been talked about before, but the reason the large language models worked is they fed it for quote unquote the internet. Give it as much information as humanly possible and then let it process and figure out where to go next was the idea. And so it was reading things from websites, book, academic papers. They got licenses with the Washington Post and some articles and news coverage. They got open source data sets, actual databases of information that just span the years in terms of what information gets consumed. But I mentioned there's a potential problem with modeling in that we rob the ability for someone to contribute, to give. In terms of fundraising, there's a definite problem when we just scrape everything off the internet and use that as our starting point. Because realistically, they don't know what good looks like. I used the word before, but there's a lot of pooled ignorance in marketing and fundraising specifically. I think one of the worst things that happened was, you go back many, many moons ago, MailChimp released email templates because they said they look pretty. Email templates have a lot of issues. So, again, I'm not getting into the weeds of this. This is a common newsletter template that you might make and then we might send out. I love a good newsletter. Newsletters have a purpose. We need to tell people, whether they're donors and non-donors, the impact of the mission. We have to tell them what's happening. We have to tell them with engaging stories. The challenge is this gets in the way. It doesn't help us with that. Because A, it reduces deliverability. When you send an email to your file, Gmail will look at that. Yahoo looks at that and says, it puts it in a couple buckets. We always know about the spam bucket. That's the most feared bucket. It's actually not the worst bucket. The worst bucket is the promotions tab. When was the last time you looked at the promotions tab? It's scary in there. I have 10,000 unread emails. I'm not looking at that. But what it does is it looks at the content of your email and says, how much of this is image? How much of this is text? What's the overall size of this? To figure out, do I go here or do I go here? The promotions tab is where email goes to die. And that thing was dead on the delivery, unfortunately. It reduces engagement. I have tests. I can prove this. I will in just a second. More than that, when you get into response rates, who doesn't love throwing a donate button at the top of their newsletter? Who can tell me a donation they actually got from the donate button at the top of the newsletter? These things have a purpose. And so Avid was actually spun out of an agency called Next After that they do nonprofit fundraising, about 50% of the clients are ministries. And our big claim to fame is the A/B testing, not this, but this, big green arrows. And so there's a couple examples worth showing to say, like, here's why I feel this is worth spending time on. Right here we have a newsletter, common newsletter. This is sent from Back to the Bible. We did a test where we sent a similar newsletter, same time, split the audience in half, and measured engagement. This is a newsletter. The goal was not to raise money. The goal was to get them to read more and engage with us. A click is valuable in that aspect. And so the one on the left versus the one on the right. The one on the left, marketing hated that. It went against, well, they love the left. Marketing hated the right because it went against the brand. It's too text heavy. Well, turns out the donors and subscribers really wanted the text. I mean, the best example on this one, I love my mom. She's actually about 10 miles that way. Love my mom to death. But my mom loves to read. And the way she consumes content is very different. We think we need to say it, get it above the fold, get it consumable in 5 seconds. My mom, who is the ideal donor, 75 years plus, giving to ministries, very devoted to her faith, that's your donor pool. She has all the time in the world to read that newsletter, and she does. And so we have to remember who this is for. It's not for us, it's for our donors and where they're at. Or we can get into this. It gets into same basic thing, left versus right. There's not a single image on the one on the right. Again, marketing did not like the one on the right. But I don't get judged based on aesthetics or tie into brand. But it was more than that. It was the language we used on these two tests. The one on the left starts off, it says, dear salutation, you don't often think about pastors needing help with their marriage. You know, that's how we normally start conversations with people. Instead, the one on the right, hi Jen, I hope you're having a great day so far. I want to tell you something that's been on my heart as of late. ... One sounds like a conversation, the other one doesn't. The difference? 272%. I want to hammer this point home. People give to people. They don't give to your ministry. They give to the person that is making the ask. Sometimes they give to the recipient of the story that you're telling them about. It's true. People give to people. And so the more we can make our communications feel person to person. And this is where, when we get into AI and all the large language models and the content that can be generated, this is the problem that exists of it used examples of people trying to sound like a big person or sound like an organization rather than a human. Web pages are written from the perspective of a third party of an organization. They're not written from a person. Although, fun fact, putting a letter on a website has proven to improve conversion if the person signing it was well known. That gets weird. The other thing that GPT loves in large language models, the only difference between this one and this, I can't even read it. It's a different language. This is a great organization, but different language. ChatGPT loves their emojis. And when you use it to help write your social media content, it changes the theme of the content. It's okay to use emojis in your communications if it's a lighthearted, but if you're making an ask, if you're making a calls to action, if you're saying, come sign this statement of belief, align with us in what we're doing, be serious about it. Would you use an emoji in most situations in that kind of communication? No. And what it does is it shifts the mindset from communication to marketing. I can tune that out because it doesn't look like what I'm used to seeing. So, large language models are, in my opinion, one of the greatest resource creators for the ministry space that has existed in a long time. Without even getting into the long-term benefits of Bible translation and what it can do to reach the lost, it can let us scale what we need to do in an infinite range. Meaning, I'll give you some examples. We can summarize donor reports. When you go to talk to somebody and ask them for $10,000, $50,000, $1 million, you need to know a lot about them. That used to require a lot of work. It doesn't anymore. You can write fundraising copy. You can scale personalization. I'll show you how to do this. Or, it's going to be scary. You can let them become the fundraiser. I'm going to put a pin in that. It gets weird, but to be continued on that one. Let's start off with a couple of hacks. I want to be very practical about ways you can use this with your own ministry. Zapier is not necessarily an AI tool per se. They will say that they are one because they can make zaps and paths. For those that don't know what it is, Zapier lets you connect everything. When something happens here, something should happen here. It doesn't matter if they're not used to connecting, it can connect. And what they can do is connect multiple things. And so one of the things we created for one ministry, they had somebody whose job was donor research. This was a $50 million ministry, so this is their full-time job was learning information, writing a report, and giving it to the major donor fundraiser to go ask for $50,000, $500,000. So what we did is we automated that. When someone made their first gift above $500, Zapier took 4 steps. It asked the CRM, tell me where they came from, and this is just raw data. Keep in mind. It doesn't have to be formatted. Where did they come from? What was their first gift? What did they give to this time? Then we went out and we did a wealth screen on them. Again, API endpoint came back and said they're this score, they have this many tangible assets, they have this much in retirement. It's creepy a little bit that everybody knows that, but we can be okay with it because everyone gets that information, right? It did a LinkedIn search. So we did a quick lookup on LinkedIn to get their profile, their employment history, and guess what? Most people put their family history on there too. Also married with 2 kids, so-and-so and so-and-so. And then we finished it with, sent it all off to ChatGPT, the paid version, so it was private. And then the major donor would get an email that's 2 pages long that was a summary of the donor with a picture of that donor that said, here's somebody you should reach out to, here's what they care about, here's how they got involved, and here's what they're doing. This took 4 hours to set up in Zapier, and it was someone's job. Now, they're doing something much better now. They've moved up. They didn't move out, don't worry. But there's ways we can automate the things that consume our world that should be easy. Zapier is a great option for that. I debate even throwing this in here. This is not, yeah, ChatGPT, shocking. Who would have thought? No, what I mean by this one is you can make your own GPT. You can make it what's called a custom GPT for those that haven't done it. You click Explore in the top right, and what you can do is feed in, here's what I sound like. Here's 10 emails I've sent out that performed well. Here's 10 social media posts that did great. You teach it to talk like you. That's how you prevent it from sounding like the aggregator of bad marketing. And then what's important is once you have one, you can keep refining it. You can figure out what works and you keep making it better. It becomes your own ChatGPT that understands how you talk, and it takes the going from getting 80% of the copy to getting 90 to 95% of the copy. It's time saver for you and minimal cost. There's no cost to making it. There's just the subscription that's something like $20 a month. Highly recommend. Also, you can throw in there the brand guidelines. Where this becomes super helpful is we capitalize Bible. We don't capitalize Bible. I've seen it go both ways. We don't use M dashes. Things like this, it can factor that in as well. Super handy. I'll do a unabashed self-promotion. So Avid does mention the data aggregation, but what we found is that a lot of the work that goes into making fundraising and marketing shouldn't have to exist anymore. When I run a year-end campaign, I don't write one email, one donation page, and one letter. I should write probably 8 emails, a survey, 2 donation pages, Google ads, Facebook ads, text messages, a pop-up on my website. The volume of content's overwhelming. It's hard to know what to say, but realistically, it's pretty much it's rinse and repeat if you look across the industry. But it needs to be framed for you. So this is what we do. We do that personalization, but then we also get to the point and say, here's 3 segments that need targeting. Take this version, make 3 more, deploy the email, deploy the content, set the data up and attach it to it. The goal is to remove the dumb work. The work that we used to hire, our past agency would hire an army of college interns to do. APIs can do that now. It's kind of nice. So that was my one pitch for my own stuff. But now I want to get into if you want to talk about what the future could look like, and I'm not sure I buy into it, but I will say something to know about. There's a new platform that's been released called version 2.ai. It's by Gibsy. The idea behind this is virtual engagement officers. This is a real AI. The goal being this is an AI bot that can build relationships with donors. This is a page on somebody's website for their staff. Nicole does not really exist. But what happens is Nicole will reach out. She'll talk to people. These people know it's an AI bot. This is not like mystery, but it's still, we'll reach out on cultivation, ask how they're doing, remember how they did, respond in kind, keep databases, make asks. I have my own feelings about this, but the reality is this is a possibility, and this is where a lot of the world is going. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. But if you want to see the potential for AI, it's this. But what I will warn you is what it gets wrong can be some of the worst parts. You don't want to lose a donor for the wrong information being communicated, or talk to a donor because they only gave me $25 so I can use my virtual officer on that. That most major donors start off giving a gift less than $250. So if we treat all low-dollar donors as if they're low dollars, you lose on the long-term upside for donors. So just worth knowing more than anything. So the virtual engagement officer, that's a thing. Last thing I'll throw out there is a lot of what we're getting into when it comes to where AI is going, how fundraising should work. We just published out an ebook that talks about how should we factor this in with our communications? How should we talk to our donors? What are the segments that should matter? What's the ROI that's reasonable, and what should we do about it? Because we too often make decisions for our ministry based on what's happening and what's right in front of us, and saying, where will the world be in a year from now? A great example is if budget's tight, most people's first reaction is to cut acquisition. The hardest thing to recover from is not having enough donors. And so it's about having the right mix and figuring out what do we do next, what do we say next, how do we get more resources from the people we already have. So that was everything I had for us today. Do I have any questions? Anything that got brought up? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned emojis. My wife just recently started putting emojis in the subject line for me because she heard, and we do think the response is better from that. But you're saying not in the body, it's okay in the subject?
The content matters. Meaning, so the question was, are all emojis bad? The answer is no. I have a couple tests that show emojis got a lift. But the results really factor in the content of the topic. Is it serious enough? And the question is, if I was sending this to a friend, would I add an emoji in that subject line? It's about people to people, and realistically, the right person does put some emojis in the subject line. But it's good to know that kind of context. So it's not a never do it, it's a be smart about when you do it. Yes, sir.
Were there any other findings from the A/B tests that were surprising or that debunked what most people actually think?
So on the family life one, or which ones? Oh my gosh, there are so many random things out there. Sure, I'll get into a couple of those. So some of the A/B experience, I'll say this, there's not one axiom that this applies to every ministry. But there's some that are pretty good on universal truths. Another good one, lapsed donors don't realize they're lapsed. We think of our donors in terms of when was the last time they gave me something, which is, it's a little selfish, but that's the way we have to look at our world, and I get that. But the reality is most people don't think in terms of it's been 2 years since I gave, and so simply reminding them, the first paragraph mentioning, hey, since your gift of $50 on May of 2023, we were able to reach this many people, we've had this much, but we need your help again. That alone has about a 30% increase in lapsed donor reactivation. Personalization. It's not heavy personalization, but it's personalization. I will say there's no big, long learning of length of content. People look at a donation page that is 2 pages long and think there's no way someone will read through that. Your donors like to read in most cases. Now, you have to know the motivations though. Meaning the main donation page that people click on donate on your page should look different than somebody that clicks on an email that says donate. Because motivations are very different. One is somebody that sought you out with the sole purpose of donating versus somebody that is interested in something you just told them and might consider donating. You need more value prop in that case. Now, same time, new donors, they don't know you yet. And again, that thought process of remove the content, get out of their way so they can give a gift does not work on new donors. You have to tell them why. Look around how many ministries are at this conference alone that be specific about the reason to give to. To provide hope is something every nonprofit can say. How are you unique and different? Value, there's different classifications for tests. There's the tactical of we moved the form, we added this button, we did these things. That gets me 10 to 20% lifts. If we tested the reason why people give, that's where we get 100% lifts. And that's also where GPT can help accelerate things. 2 other things I would encourage you to use when you talk to GPTs. One is ask it, what are some behavioral psychology concepts that would motivate my donors? There's a whole science called behavioral psychology of construal level theory that people will do things that if it looks like it's within a small set group that they want to be a part of. Foot in the door, ask for just a little thing, and then a little bit more, then a little bit more. Different motivations move different people, and ChatGPT can give you ideas of different approaches to the same ask. And then the other way to frame it is ask me, what are writing frameworks that I can use, and then pick a couple. Start with the problem, agitate, then give the solution. That's a different one compared to tell a story and everything else. So, not one answer for you, but some interesting thoughts on it. Any other questions? Yeah, love it.
Between the different models and like Claude, GPT, Gemini, all, have you found one better at marketing copy?
Grok is incredibly good. It doesn't plug into anything though. That's the tricky part. I like Claude for my coding, but I like ChatGPT, and 4.0 is good enough for me for copywriting in most cases. It's the most prevalent. It's pretty free. It's good to go on that. Yeah.
Would you say it's better to use Grok if it's better, or to train something like it?
Training is always going to be better. And ChatGPT has a much more cost-effective way of training than Grok does right now. Yeah, but out of the gate, Grok is a little bit better.
Given the fact that so many people here are probably looking for resourcing for their AI technology projects, how would you describe the ideal giver
Hmm.
to the needs that exist in this room? Because I believe the Christian abiding giver, piloting and failing, is one type giver, the venture giver,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the traditional, I just bought 100 whatever entities for the ministry. The type giver for what's going on in this room and this conference, I believe, are a little bit nuanced than the traditional giver that exists today.
I would
What are
agree.
your thoughts? Not me, people.
I'll repeat the question so everyone heard it. The question is somebody that would give to what we're talking about here, to advancing the kingdom through embracing the latest in technology, is that donor different than building the next building, running the next campaign? I'd agree that it is. You have to overcome the fear aspect if you have to do a little bit of it. Now, what I will say on this, though, is when you ask for money, you can educate or you can ask. You can't do both. So there has to be some amount of buy-in. But what I would say is a message that will resonate with everyone is going back to the source of truth and less about the people aren't nearly as interested in how the sausage is made more than the outcome. They want to know lives saved, lives changed, people that have been impacted. And so keeping it a little bit high level, not saying, and then we're going to use this model to do this and to do this. We're going to maximize our efficiency embracing the latest technology. That's something that even my 75-year-old mother who won't go online to give a gift will do, which is my career, which keep that in mind, how that hurts every time. So I'm not sure to answer your question, but I would agree that the donor is different. The asks needs to be framed correctly, but keeping it at a high enough level that it emphasizes the outcome, not necessarily the ingredients, is going to sell way more people than saying we're going to be the most advanced tech in the world. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining me in the kindergarten room. Appreciate it.